Revelation 1385. From the 18th, 19th and 20th of April 1940. Stage of free will is of highest importance. Infinite space needs infinite creations, and every creation testifies to the activity of God. It testifies to His omnipotence and wisdom and His incessant love will. And all creations are animated, that is in constant change. Thus in certain activity, which never permits the remaining in the same stage. Nothing in God's creation work is not in constant higher development, as long as it is subjected to the divine will. This must first be recognized, to grasp the meaning of the stage where free will enables the being to promote its higher development, or also to form regressively. It must be considered that through incomprehensible times, the path lead always upwards. That the permanent change of the works of creation, guaranteed progressive development. And that now after an unthinkably long time, the free will of man can be cause for the highest perfection as well as for the standstill or decline of spiritual development. God gives the freedom of His will to the being for only a short span of time, after an endlessly long earthly process in bound will. And this short time is decisive for eternity. Because whether also the being after the earthly course in the hereafter still has the possibility to attain the degree of maturity which the entrance into light spheres presupposes, it will never reach the degree of perfection which rightly used will on earth earns. It is so extraordinarily significant how the will is used on earth. Whether the freedom of the will, which God gives to the being, is used to draw fully near to God, or to again strive towards matter and desiring everything it has already overcome to a certain extent during the process through all works of creation. This is tremendously significant, because the life on earth as a human being, is the conclusion of the being's stay on earth, which lasted for unimaginable times. Every stage of development was a step closer to perfection. The being served in every form and thereby always attained that degree of maturity which was the precondition for the revival of the next form. Now, however, with the last outer form as man a certain freedom is given to him, that he can use this form according to his own will. Men can continue to strive upward as well as to nourish the drive downward in himself. He will not be hindered in his intention. However, the success of the right as well as the wrong striving, is so far apart. The right use of the will brings the highest happiness, but a wrong will, also the deepest decline, and each condition must be taken upon oneself after death on earth. The possibilities of formation of the spiritual being are also available in the hereafter, but such a state of happiness can never be reached as it is granted to the human being striving on earth, at his death. For the earth has been chosen by the eternal Creator to enable the final perfection to willing beings. The earth is undeniably the place where the soul of man can be purified and rid of all its slags. The stay on earth has therefore the highest meaning for the being, because it once stood completely distanced from God and can be, after completion of the earthly career, in closest nearness to God. If the being on earth does not willfully increase the distance from God again, the long way has thus brought a certain perfection of the spiritual state, which can still be increased in the last stage, but can also be decreased. The perfection of the spiritual in the earthly life, however, earns the being the right to the inheritance of the Father in heaven. Whoever attains the childship of God in earthly life, is therefore a true child of God, that is, highest bliss is his inheritance, can create and form his highest pleasure and stay in God's nearness in an unceasing state of happiness. While the beings whom did not seriously strive to come near to God on earth, can certainly perfect themselves in the hereafter and likewise still become blessed, but never reach this degree which forms the being into the child of God. There is always the great, imminent danger that also the hereafter does not bring redemption to the being, provided that its will opposes exactly as on earth, all those forces who want to help. The danger looms that it would regress and that the distance from God becomes greater and greater. And finally the being approaches the banished state more and more, therefore the earthly journey which lasts for unthinkable times, was in vain, and therefore the being has covered it again and causes him again the unspeakable agonies of being unredeemed. These are unimaginable sufferings, which the being cannot be spared, that it may reach again that degree which earns it again the grace of an incarnation as human. Because the last perfection is to be reached only through the conscious striving for God. In free will it must turn to God, and it can never be forcibly directed, otherwise it could not reach the degree of childship of God, which has most devoted love and deepest desire for God as prerequisite, and this again is only the result of a completely free will. Highest granting of heavenly bliss is entitled to the being on the one hand, and on the other hand, the possibility of sinking into deepest night. And both is left to itself. It can make its own choices, and therefore its will can decide how life in the eternity is formed. For these are always concepts of eternity. Both the life in bliss and the state of being banned in the form. Because the latter is also not to be called limited in time for humans. The stay in the form is also eternal for human terms, even though everything being is moving towards final redemption. Amen.